Database decision making is a process of gathering data, looking at how students are progressing towards specific goals in their academic or behavioral performance. So you're going to identify the current desired levels of performance, use an evidence-based intervention, regularly monitor progress toward meeting that goal. So there's your data. And then if you need to modify the intervention based on that data, do it. This is an iterative process rather than just a few steps to follow once. Database decision-making is a process that can be implemented at all levels, from entire districts all the way down to specific students. So why is data important? It will be challenging for teachers to know if students are making adequate progress or what additional supports or instructional modifications may be important to support students who are not making adequate progress. If you don't have data, how do you know you're making the best decision for that student moving forward? You're just guessing. And unfortunately, although we see a lot of data collected by teachers, it's rarely being used to make decisions for individual student progress. So now we're going to take a quick few minutes to look at some practical ways to take data on routines and procedures. This data sheet was adapted from the STAR curriculum, and some of you may be using STAR or LINCS, and if you recognize this, that is fantastic. Continue using that. Make sure you're reflecting on your data. But let's look quickly at this one that we've altered. There you have your task analysis for your routine. At the very bottom there, you have your percentage. What is the mastery level you want them to be at? How often are you going to collect data? We have a scoring guide, and if you notice, that's where you put your prompting levels too. And then you have your actual scores. So on this data sheet, a 1 shows that they need a full physical prompt to correctly respond. So that tells us we need to do some direct teaching on that skill. And if they're getting a 2, that tells us we need to look for a prompt or a scaffold. But if they get a 4, that means we need to be reinforcing that because they're reaching a level of independence. Now, this can also be scored for a whole class. Let me tell you a story before we go on to our next sheet. There's an 8th grade science class, and this is the class that the example from this training comes from. It was getting toward December and things were falling apart right at the beginning of class. The students would line up in the hallway, and when the bell rang, everyone was quiet, and they came into the room, and they weren't getting their materials. They weren't sitting down at their desk. They weren't getting started on their bell ringer. So the teacher decided she needed to do something. So she created a task analysis. She posted it when they came back from holiday break. So let's look at this data to see how it helps us out. So this scoring guide is a bit different than the one we just looked at. If you look down at the blue, it's the number of students not completing the step. And then later on the purple, they transition into individual students because the majority of students were completing them correctly, but there were a few left that still needed some scaffolds to support them. So when the teacher came back from holiday break, they posted this routine, told the students about it, and collected data. And so the first week, that 119, clearly the students were not super impressed. 13 of them did not complete the step as expected. So the teacher tried some prompts and some scaffolds while they were explicitly instructing students on how to implement or how to complete this routine. And as time went by, if you keep looking across those dates, most of the students had learned the routine, but there were a few students that were consistently not meeting the expectation. So we look at 126, down to 8 students not completing the task. We look at 22, we're down to 4 students not completing the task. And so this is where that teacher moves to individual data. So if we look on 221 here, we have Jacoby, Kennedy, and Spring. But if you keep looking on the second one, we have Kennedy and Spring. And on the fourth one, we have Kennedy and Spring. And so the teacher decided to separate Kennedy and Spring coming into the class together or sitting by each other together. And so they split them up. And guess what? It solved that problem. But there was another student that was still coming in late on 3-7. Let's look down at the bottom line. So in both of those, there are 4 students that are not beginning their seat work or their bell ringer. Those students ended up needing some scaffolds to get started. So the teacher started using some super easy bell ringers to like build their confidence, and that worked for 2 of them. But then the other 2 still needed some resources, so the teacher made them a checklist and gave them some resources that they could reference that would be able to support them in completing that bell ringer. And it was hung up on the board, and so the entire class had access to it. It wasn't just for those 2 students, it supported everyone. And now let's go back and look up at Jacoby on 3-7. So what the teacher found out was that he was coming from basketball practice and he was having a hard time getting into the locker rooms, getting changed, and then coming back to class. And so she and the coach and Jacoby ended up working something out. And so you can't see it here because we ran out of data sheet on here, but the next check after 3-7, there are no more names on it because they were able to strategically over time figure out the scaffolds and prompts and resources that those students needed to complete that procedure independently. So there's a few pro tips to elevate your data collection. You can customize data sheets. The one that we just showed you, we have on our website. You can download and customize. Think about how often you want to collect your data. If you see the students every day, we recommend 1 time a week. Setting data days can be very supportive with getting your data collected. When I was a classroom teacher, on Mondays, I had 1 para that collected the routine data. On Monday, she collected 1 routine. On Wednesday, she collected another. And then on Friday, she collected a 3rd. We definitely recommend starting with 1 to 2 routines. I wouldn't do more than 3 at a time. That's a lot of stuff to work on and it can get confusing. And once you've learned a routine, you want to make sure they're generalizing that across environments. We really want to point out the importance of collaboration for this process. Students are going to be coming and going. They're going to be in so many different settings in the school. It's really important to consider talking to all of those teachers and all of those educators that they're visiting during the school day. And don't forget about parents and families. If you find something that works really well at school, share that with parents. And for example, a visual support of a classroom entry could work For the parents showing the student like how they get on the bus or when they arrive at school, what do they do next? Related services, so important and so helpful. Speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, all great collaborators and can help troubleshoot so many specific issues. And then support staff, your cafeteria staff, bus staff, office staff, typically over the moon to support students and are happy to help. And then, of course, please don't forget your general education counterparts. As we move toward inclusion in Arkansas, it is going to be imperative that you are planning and working together with those general education teachers.